Come on in, come on in. It's good to see everybody here. We are continuing our speaker series. I believe this is our last speaker for this year. Is that right? Am I right? This is our last speaker for this year. We'll, of course, continue the series again in the fall. So if there are folks that you will be interested in having come, let us know and we'll do the footwork and legwork on that. I'm going to tell you an interesting story. So my first connection with Dr. Gilberto Conchas came back in 2000 when I applied for graduate school. I applied to Harvard and Stanford. And I was admitted to Harvard, and guess who was assigned to be my dissertation chair? Dr. Gilberto Conchas, right? So we go way, way back. My mentor at Michigan, Dr. Silvia Hurtado, had done work with him when he was at the University of Michigan. Another reason why I like Dr. Conchas is he's also a Wolverine. So we're so excited to have him, and he's going to talk from his two recent books. Over lunch, we talked about developing a new book about Latinos and school choice. So look for that soon if you guys are interested in writing a chapter for a new book on Latinos and school choice. We're still talking through a potential collaboration around that very important topic in our society today. So today we're really excited to have him. He is currently the chair of Chicano Studies at University of California, Santa Barbara, but is on leave from UC Irvine. I told him we would love to have him here at Sac State, add to the firepower that we already have. So I put in a good word for us. I think he's enjoying his visit. So without further ado, let me introduce to the folks here in the room, and also I should welcome folks that are watching on YouTube this lecture some time from now. Also those that are watching on Periscope around the world. So during this talk, if you are a Twitter person, please tweet from his lecture. You will see me tweeting from his lecture. Our Twitter handle is @SacStateEDD. That's @SacStateEDD. So if you're a Twitter person, please tweet at us from Dr. Conchas' lecture. And without further ado, Dr. Conchas. Thank you.
Well, thank you all for having me here. It's wonderful to be at Sac State. Thank you, Julian, Dr. Julian Velasquez, for that great introduction, and thank you for dating me back to the era. What I'm doing today, actually, it's the first lecture I'm doing on this book. I had 3 books that came out this year, and was busy writing, and finally had the opportunity to come and present on this work. And what I'm going to do is just present an overview of what this edited collection is about. And welcome questions anytime if you have questions. And again, it's I created this presentation for you all. So if you have feedback, that would be important as well. I'd like to start. So cracks in the schoolyard, confronting Latino educational inequality. So when it comes to inequality, the United States of America has no equal. When it comes to opportunity, yet again, the United States of America has no equal. Therein lies the contradictory paradox of American society and culture. At the center of this complex dilemma is P-20 public education as the best remaining hope for disenfranchised populations. As you see from the quote here, as President Obama astutely proclaimed to the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce back in 2009, and yet, despite resources that are unmatched anywhere in the world, we've let our grades slip, our schools crumble, our teacher quality falls short, and other nations outpace us, And year after year, a stubborn gap persists between how well white students are doing compared to their African American and Latino classmates. So today, the American dilemma is the complex and opposing nature of inequality and opportunity that run deep through the majority of institutions in society. In this case, namely in education. Okay? So if we look at, for instance, the high school completion rates. In 1985, less than half of all Latino students completed high school. In 2013, less than 70% of Latino students completed high school, compared to 90%, 93% of white students and 90% of Asian students. Therefore, while we do see improvements in completion rates across all student groups, these improvements have not closed the gaps. If we dig further, look at the state level high school graduation rates. And this here are the Latino population. If you take California, it's almost 60%. Illinois, Georgia, Oklahoma is getting better. When you look at post-secondary attainment, this is even more troubling. The major concern is that with post-secondary attainment is that the gaps have widened over time. So for example, in 1985, the black-white post-secondary gap was 9.7%, and the Latino-white gap was 12.13%. In 2013, the black-white gap was 13.2%, and the Latino-white gap, 20.1%. So again, the evidence suggests that patterns of educational inequality have in fact grown. To give you a further example, if you look at state-level post-secondary attainment rates. California, you barely have a little over 10% for Latinos. And you all are studying this now in these fabulous classes that you're taking with your professors, right? Illinois is doing better, Georgia is doing better, Oklahoma is doing better than California. Some of the common stereotypes, and we hear them all the time. We can put African Americans in there as well. Some of the common stereotypes. Latinos are culturally deprived. What do we mean by culturally deprived? Can someone help me here? Yes.
Their families don't care about school.
Well, families, in other words, the Latino culture, right, does not promote high expectations for the kids. In other words, you need to assimilate into the American culture, right, in order to do well. Common stereotype is Latinos are undocumented, right? They don't have papeles, right? Latinos are dumb. They can't learn. They don't want to speak English. Low parental expectations. Yet research shows that Latino parents have high parental expectations for their kids. Some say that education for Latinos is not important. Boys are gangbangers and thugs. You hear this all the time. The girls are not interested in education. They just want to have babies. Right? We all heard that stereotype. So in this book is a collection of Latino achievement cases in communities and schools. So in other words, we're focusing on what works and attempting to replicate successful structures. And that's typically what my research is about. How do you organize schools and communities to promote success, celebrate successes instead of failure? Right? The cases challenge deficit models of schooling among Latinos and turn school failure on its head. They show how education can work despite inequality in and outside of the schoolyard. Because it's just as important in terms of what happens outside of school as much as having good teachers, right? Having proper curriculum, properly resourced. The various cases depict Latinos as active actors in their quest for social and economic mobility instead of hopeless victims. And these counter spaces begin to fill the cracks in the schoolyard that create disparity, failure, and marginalization. And I hope people understood why I call it cracked in the schoolyard, right? You know, you guys work in schools and you see these cracks. And oftentimes you go in there and fill these cracks, but they don't really change the structures of inequality. So these studies take a rare look at in-school and out-of-school success stories on a comparative level instead of those depicting only failure. For all too long, we've been concentrating on failure, yet policy and practice has not done much with it. We explore the social and cultural processes that enable Latino youth and young adults to escape the equal structures of public schooling to perform well in school. Now, as a teacher, I always like to engage with my class, and I teach this large course, multicultural education, 200 or 300 students, and I like to ask questions for extra credit. So I'm going to ask an extra credit question, if that's okay. But who answers right gets the books. Okay? So I want someone to explain to me what would be a social process within school and what would be a cultural process within school. What is structural? What is cultural? Come on, try it. Try it. Yes?
Yeah, I'll take a shot. So, let's say from a structural standpoint, we're talking about the rules and policies in place.
Yes.
Basically, the type of regulations, policies, structure that you have
And that creates what?
in order to create efficiency and effectiveness in the organization and accountability.
Right, so one example would be these policies that create certain structures in place, rules and regulations, that in turn create a culture of high achievement or not. Right? Can you pass this down? So the book illuminates how educators in schools can address these issues by becoming increasingly attuned to the sociocultural worlds in which students live. So he gave an example of what I mean by sociocultural worlds, right? The structural and the cultural in hand. I'm a sociologist, so I study structure. Does that make sense? Okay. Pave the way towards overcoming challenges that historically disadvantaged groups face and to receive equitable, high-quality education. So why focus on California? You know, when I was publishing this book, or wanting to publish it, the editor said, why focus on California? And, you know, because of the population, right? As the most populous and ethnic diverse state in the nation, it has been a leader in promoting policy reform. Okay? Over the years, however, Californians voted against important civil rights policy around immigrants, bilingual education, and affirmative action, right? And other states, such as Texas and others, have followed California's attempt to change these important policy processes. So in light of the dismantling of affirmative action, education policy desperately needs new ways to increase the academic success and college enrollment of Latino students in California. I believe can once again be a leader. So my hope is that this volume illuminates various examples to tackle inequality education head on. And because we have the maestro of social media back there, right? Maybe we can do something about it. So bear with me. The Barrio Schoolboy. That's me. My academic and social experiences attest to the complex and contradictory nature of the American dilemma. I am the son of Mexican immigrant farm workers, and I am a Barrio boy. I'm a tenured professor in the University of California. I embody inequality and opportunity. I was born in East Los Angeles, California, to proud and hardworking parents. My father ventured into unknown territory during the early 1960s as part of the Bracero program, an unjust and exploitative labor policy that brought in low-skilled, low-paid agricultural workers to the United States. His was a life of sweat, toil, and outright discrimination. My mother then followed with my two older brothers as undocumented and unwanted sojourners. However, when I was born in the winter of 1969, immigration policy allowed my family to become legal residents. Legal residents, but permanent brown and uneducated foreigners in a race, class, and gendered society. When I was 5 years old, we moved to the pleasant central coast of Ventura, California. Both my father and mother secured employment in a local plant harvesting mushrooms in substandard working conditions. Like my father, my mother worked long hours, but was burdened with what they call the second shift, right? As a woman, she was expected to work outside of the home and within the home. She had the opportunity to work for pay, but experienced the harsh reality of patriarchal society. I vividly remember that on her day off, I would accompany my mother to the local laundromat to wash clothes. Okay? We didn't have the luxury of having a washer and dryer in our home at the time. So we would go to the laundromat, we would then shop for groceries, clean the house, and eventually cook. She did not drive, and we did not own a washing machine or dryer. So we pushed over 20 loads of clothes and grocery carts and did the same when we shopped for food. At that time, we were a family of 7. My mother and father never complained. And I'm sure some of you have similar stories. Both my parents instilled in me a sense of motivation, high aspirations, and dedications to succeed. My story, however, is not one of resilience. I did not do it alone, for my parents were the institutional agents who, despite limited opportunity, provided me with my first positive sense of social and cultural capital. I eventually met other key institutional structure and agents that further launched my young academic career. Although my father did not live to hear about my academic work as a sociologist, or live to see his son as a Harvard professor, a tenured professor at the University of California, and a senior program officer with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, my teaching and my research represent my parents' commitment and perseverance for equity and equality. My parents opened the door for me, and my undergraduate experience provided the social scaffolds to acquire and activate the necessary social capital to further expand on the limited opportunities afforded the son of immigrant laborers with plenty of cultural wealth, but with limited financial resources. So America is fraught with both inequality and opportunity. I represent that complicated dilemma. My individual determination was not enough to complete college, obtain a PhD, and acquire tenure. I benefited from institutional processes and social policies like affirmative action that mediated my engagement and success. As Justice Sonia Sotomayor passionately stated, that she did not need to apologize for affirmative action policies that created opportunity for her at Princeton and at Yale. So it all began with my parents' hard work, the institutional agents, and the various policies along the way that paved the path for me. I too have no need to apologize. This is indeed the heart of this important volume on Latino education, the need to create achievement cases amidst inequality. Okay. So some of you now in class are learning about positionality and reflexivity as researchers, right? Have you guys taken research courses yet? So an important component of the role of the researcher in critical research is reflection into the position of the researcher within society and within research. What I did previously is present to you where I stand, right? as a social scientist and how my position informs the kind of work I do in academia. Does that make sense? Okay. So reflexivity among Latino scholars has shed light into important questions and research dynamics into Latino education. Through such research, perspectives of Latino research have added to important methodological insights, which I call, the next slide will explain. So Latino scholars are in a unique position to understand the lived experiences of Latino students because their own lived experiences have involved negotiating different voices, strategies, and identities for survival in education institutions. So my experiences growing up, on the avenue in Ventura, taking 20 loads of laundry with my mom, informs my understanding of educational inequality much differently than someone who grew up in very different circumstances, right? And we can shed light in different ways to certain phenomena. So in my first book, I wrote this. And I remember when I wrote that, my doctoral chair at the time, before this became a book, says, if you write that, many people are going to contest your research, saying that you're not being objective enough, right? So I wrote another issue with which I dealt with relate to my politics. I chose to concentrate more on programs that best represented the racial and ethnic composition of the school, and that made strong steps toward dismantling inequality. I firmly believe that racial inequality must be addressed. Thus, my sympathies lie with teachers who held similar views. I cannot hide the fact that I was less sympathetic to individuals that maintain the status quo. As a racial minority researcher, I strongly believe that schools should be places of fairness and equal participation. My critical stance, I hope, has allowed me to illuminate agents, those individuals and group behaviors involved in seeking to improve the quality of schooling for urban youth. So in a sense, these cases are seen as pivotal methodological terms. Okay. The methodological developments considered in this volume reveal previously overlooked Latino and Latina educational experience, perspectives, and struggles. I argue that critical methodologies with various origins and diverse applications have the potential to depict and contest the structural oppression faced by Latinos in schools and in society. So in what follows, I survey the development of methodologies along three key themes that are particularly important to understanding educational experience of Latino youth as pivotal methodological terms. And these three different themes are: one, centering on race, racism, and inequality; two, family, cultural resources, and community strengths; and three, exploring ethnicity, identity, and immigration. And what I'm going to do is just kind of present an example of a case within. And those of you that are more interested can go buy the book. So one example of centering on race, racism, and inequality is a chapter that I co-wrote with Irene Vega, who's currently a doctoral student in sociology at UCLA, and Patricia Ceguera, who's a professor of higher education at Penn State. It's called Race, Brotherhood, and Educational Engagement in the Urban Context. Right? And here it's a case study that looks at this after-school program in Long Beach called the Male Academy. Because we all know from the literature that we are losing our brown and black boys, more so to the prison system than through the educational system. It's a very bleak issue. So Long Beach tried to do an interesting thing and created 6 male academies and their 6 comprehensive high schools. And we had the luxury of hanging out and studying those. And so here's one chapter here where we looked at this issue of how this brotherhood, this bond, right, created like the social capital among these peers of high achieving and low achieving Black and Latino kids. And they actually helped each other in many ways that that was pretty surprising and interesting. So even those that were doing poorly did better over time, and those that we actually were doing really good, their grades even improved. So you had kids in here that were previously in the juvenile justice system, some ex-gang members, as well as the college ASB president and vice president. You had athletes in there. So they really created this bond. So again, the results of this indicate the achieving students, those who are already doing well, entered average grade 2 above. They maintained their GPA or improved, as well as, what do we call the other ones? Achieving versus non-aspiring students. Those who entered grade 4 and average below increased their academic efforts and reported a heightened sense of belonging in the school community. So overall, what we argue in this chapter is that framing this organization as a Black and Latino brotherhood effectively promote peer bonding, which builds attachment to the larger school community. And it was interesting because there was so much pressure, but not in a bad way, to do things and complete things. So if a student didn't do their homework, the other brothers would get on them. You know, if a student started hanging out with people they shouldn't be hanging out with, their peers would. So they didn't want to make their peers upset with them. And what's really interesting here is that who do you think of the high school? Who do you think started this after-school club? What kind of teacher? What was that? A culturally responsive, yeah. A coach. He was a coach, right? And coaches, I mean, the kids really trust coaches. And coaches really know how to relate to students. People have any questions? Do I have plenty of time, Julian?
You have 30 minutes.
Oh. I better hurry up. The other is family, cultural resources, and community strengths, right? Really depicting the strengths that come from families, Latino families, the communities, right? And here's a study I did with my doctoral student, Alejandro Baran, where we looked at, over 2 years, we looked at, I think it was 24 community-based organizations in Los Angeles, right? And dealt with how can we use community-based organizations, CBOs, right, to empower Latino immigrant mothers and fathers to advocate for their kids. Okay. Some of you, most of you probably worked in schools and know that there's a lot of parents that advocate for the kids all the time, right? So you say, Jacob is a straight A student and belongs in college prep, or AP, right? Latino parents don't tend to do that, right? And it's not advocating in a way that the parents are going to bug the teacher all the time, but right, empowering them to be active agents. And what's really interesting is that some of these programs created literacy, kind of like a two-generation approach, where they would teach the parents English skills at the same time teach the young kids. Right? So this is a particular study where we look at family cultural wealth, right? Community cultural wealth. The third is exploring ethnicity, identity, and immigration. And this particular chapter is written by Edelina Burciaga, who just finished her PhD in sociology at UC Irvine and has her first academic position, I think it's University of Denver in Colorado. Okay? She looked at the promise and reality of Flyover versus Doe, community resistance to the school deportation pipeline. Okay? And in 1982, the Supreme Court of the U.S. held in Flyover versus Doe that undocumented immigrant children have the right to attend public schools, stating that education plays a fundamental role in maintaining the fabric of our society. Okay? So that legal decision established the K-12 school system as a safe haven for undocumented immigrant children. In recent years, however, an increasingly hostile and anti-immigrant climate and collaboration between local police, including school police, which at times are the issues. We saw those videos online, right, with the school police take things into their own hands and often, in many ways, handle youth in ways that they should not. and immigration officials have resulted in eroding the rights of undocumented immigrant youth in schools. So Edelina drew on 8 months of participant observation of the Coalition for Safer Schools, which is in Atlanta, Georgia. Okay? So the chapter highlights how community members, including parents, are building a foundation for long-term change in school policies and practices that disproportionately impact color, including undocumented immigrant youth. And it's interesting that this Coalition for Safer Schools was part of the Gay-Lesbian Alliance, and worked closely with parents of the undocumented to forge this important alliance. So filling the cracks in the schoolyard. And again, I say filling because when you have cracks in schoolyards, those folks go in and put tar in there, right? Kind of like Band-Aid solutions. So as a sociologist, I say, yeah, you fill the cracks, but you don't disrupt the structure. So more is needed, right? Again, it's a step going forward, but more is needed, right? Like our professors, is it cloaking inequality, right? So the chapter offer various methodologies and findings to illuminate both injustice and hopeful possibilities in education. Together, these studies inform ways to understand assets and agency. Remember, it counters those stereotypes, right? Assets and agency of Latino youth, their families, and their communities. Such studies counter a deficit perspective of Latino youth and provide windows into a critical hope toward equitable transformation in the education system and beyond the schoolyard. Remember, it's equally important what happens within school and outside of school. So I use a frame of critical hope to discuss how such work can expose and fill the cracks of inequality in the schoolyard. And here's what I mean. So in the words of Tupac Shakur, critical hope means understanding and celebrating the tenacity and will of urban youth. Okay, and I borrowed this from a local researcher, Andrade Duncan. Is it Duncan Andrade? Right? Who's done important works here with, he has a great way of looking at it, Roses in the Concrete. Right? And now he has a community school built on this whole notion of critical hope. Okay? And those of you that are becoming researchers, you know, I'm mainly a qualitative researcher, and this book came out as a qualitative project in that we built on this theoretical proposition. These case studies came together, and then these case studies supposed to this notion of critical hope, right? And then we there kind of expanded upon critical hope. So the achievement cases in this volume illuminate the will, tenacity, and other incredible assets of Latino communities, and highlight methods and practical examples that foster such strength towards critical hope and transformative change. The achievement cases foster critical hope because they acknowledge injustice while pushing for transformation. Okay? So the chapters illuminate several methods and pathways to critical hope through critical investigation and to take it for granted norms and practices, from individual level consciousness to policy reform to community-based reform efforts. So the chapters reveal the importance and promise of disrupting deficit notions of Latino communities and working with such communities towards critical solutions. So according to Duncan Andrade, you have material hope, Socratic sensibility, and audacious hope. People heard this before, right? Critical hope centers material resources and conditions in the lives of youth, partly as a means to acknowledge needs and set up support systems, like these super scaffolds, you know, Avid and other things like that. Socratic sensibility explains the importance and pain associated with examining injustice. And audacious hope involves authentic caring and empathy along the struggle. And then what I like to do next is kind of like show how the 3 different case studies represent this kind of hope. So chapter 4 in the Latino Brotherhood draws attention to how individual strengths can be leveraged with material hope, in this case in the form of an after-school venue. and supporting community building. The sense of community leads into audacious hope in the form of brotherhood. Does that make sense? Right? Such community building supports a forum for engagement and achievement for Latino males. So the chapter underscores the importance of community building, which marginalized communities are not always afforded when struggling against each other, rather than struggling together toward transformative change. Right? And here again, it was a brotherhood of Latino and Black males helping each other strive, right? Pull each other up. The CBOs in LA highlights the assets within community by focusing on cases where communities are organized and share their knowledge. The case provides insight in how knowledge of parents and communities can be leveraged through community-based organizations that work with communities to promote school readiness. I've done a lot of research where I say, schools can't do it on their own. Teachers are taxed. Even the greatest of teachers can't do it on their own. Right? Some of the greatest reform efforts are when they work with communities. You remember that schools are embedded in a community context, right? And we need to understand what's happening in the community before we fix what's happening within schools. So I remember when I was a professor, associate professor at Irvine, and I was doing research at a school in LA, and they build these beautiful schools, right? And they brought in, and this was an alternative school, so they brought in kids from different neighborhoods into that school. And they were wondering, this is a great school, we don't understand why there's so much gang involvement, right? They didn't go out and research and understand the community surrounding the schools. You got different gang factions coming in and bringing problems within the schools. Does that make sense? Right? So really understanding the environment, the social context in which schools are embedded in makes sense. So again, it delineates the growth of Latino parental cultural wealth, what I call deep in the concrete jungle of downtown LA. And then the chapter 10 on undocumented youth, do people have any questions? Because I know I'm going pretty fast. There's a lot, right? The case targets specific components of material hope faced by many members of the Latino community. It pushes towards understanding of policy and practical level transformation within specific challenges that society places on identity formation for many Latino youth. We see how in recent years, however, an increasingly hostile and immigrant climate and collaboration between local police, including school police and immigration officials, have resulted in eroding the rights of undocumented youth in schools. So this chapter highlights how community members are building a foundation for long-term change in school policies and practices that disproportionately impact people of color, including undocumented. So Latino critical hope. In line with the conception of critical hope, critical methodologies in this book have opened up questions about, one, how the assessments we use contribute to and limit the way we understand the problem, right? And this will be available for them, the PowerPoint?
Yes, we can make it available on the website.
Yeah. Whose perspective should be taken into account as we investigate the problem, right? And how a broader, historically contextualized look at our current situation informs our understanding. Sometimes we forget about the historical stuff. Right? As part of this critical perspective, these critical methodologies frame inquiries by not only investigating what is not working, and this is what's key, but also by actively promoting and learning from instances of successes or achievement cases. Again, it's not going to disrupt the larger structure, which we need to do, but in the short run, it helps create these success narratives. So the new directions. The volume displays how many different forms of critical research can inform the perceptions and critical consciousness of future educators, speak to needed policy reform, and pave the way for programs founded in Critical Hope. In other words, Latino achievement cases included here revealed methods to foster critical hope as linked to the material structural transformation of educational structures. I hope others can look to the methods and findings within this book to dismantle deficit notions of Latino youth, foster the diverse assets and potential within Latino communities, and move forward in critical hope. I end with this. It will give us time to interact. Bell hooks. There must exist a paradigm, a practical model for social change that includes an understanding of ways to transform consciousness that are linked to efforts to transform structures. Thank you. I went pretty fast, sorry. Any questions? Yes?
Just to clarify the statistics that you used at the very start, I was wondering, the percentage, is that the percentage of the population, or is that the percentage of the population within schools, like students?
Percentage of the population. Yeah. And I meant to bring the charts themselves, and if you want to email me, and I'll send it to you. They're actually in my book that came out in April, called Inequality, Power, and School Success.
As you invoked your struggles in the beginning, it shaped you like this. So I have two questions on that. Are you willing to allow your children to have that struggle so you can shape them in that way? And the second one is, usually when we look for the problem, we go outside. But have you looked inside for the problem? Where is the deficit coming from inside?
Individuals, you mean?
No, as a society, as a Latino society.
Well, I mean, that's a hard question. You know, one has to tread between not explicating cultural roles, right? I think, and this is where sometimes I get in trouble, that we have to acknowledge that there's issues in our communities. We have to acknowledge there's this intergenerational cycle that we're passing on of behaviors, norms, and attitudes. However, that is not an ethnic issue. It's a material issue. It's economic deprivation. It's issues of poverty, right? And these cycles of poverty are hard to break. And if I were to put my Marxist boots on, you know, it is shaped like capitalism to produce a reserve army of low labor, low income labor, right? The McDonald's, the workers of the world, right? The people. What's the happiest place in the world? What? It's in Anaheim. Disneyland. The happiest place in the world, Disneyland. Yet across the street, you have families living in motels. They call them the motel kids. The families can't afford a down payment for rent. I think is what they call it, the down payment for when you rent. You have to produce the deposit. You have to produce a first month, last month, and whatever, right? $3,000 to $4,000 is a lot of money to people. Okay. So instead, they live in motels. Hardworking parents. So you're working often 2 jobs. Maybe you're a single mother. Your kid comes home from school with no adult present, except those behaviors that happen in these type of communities. Prostitution, drug dealers, domestic violence, right? So how do you break that? Education, I still believe, is the best hope, right? So it's not an issue that we can say that Latino culture is at fault, but rather it's a structural issue that we must acknowledge. Let me give you another example, if that's okay. Let me ask you a question. I have one more book here.
Make it a hard question. So an instructor can get it. That's virtual chess.
Let me ask you a hard question. Explain to me why Asians are more successful than Latinos and blacks in society.
Well, I read something which is far-reaching, which is it's all about involuntary versus voluntary immigration.
Tell me about that.
So involuntary, usually people who are successful are the people who have immigrated voluntarily. That means they know where they want to go, they know what they want
I'll
to do.
give you this book and another book later if you tell me who's the author of it. Oh, my.
I am one cohort before them, so I know Agbo.
So you have one perspective by Ogbu, cultural ecological paradigm, that says, right, that the reason why Asians and immigrants that come to the U.S. do better is because they have not internalized a sense of inferiority. They have not internalized racism because they're here, because they perceive their presence in the U.S. as not being forced upon them, but they're here because they want to be here. So one can say that contemporary Mexican immigrants are a form of that. But way back when the land was taken away, Chicanos in the Southwest with the Treaty of Guadalupe were seen as involuntary immigrants. So Asians, various Asian ethnic groups are voluntary minorities, as opposed to involuntary minorities that perceive their presence in the U.S. as forced upon them by white society. Examples? Native Americans, Hawaiians, African Americans, right? And so there's an explanation that involuntary minorities have an ambivalence towards schooling because populations don't trust schools. And this is the kind of paradigm I took in my first book, and I challenged it because I said, wait, there's plenty of involuntary minorities that do well, and guess what? There's a lot of involuntary minorities that don't do well. Okay? So that's one possible explanation, but there's a more sophisticated one called pre-migration factors. I have teach large class and ask the question, why do certain ethnic groups do better than others? And I'm in Irvine. There's a lot of Persian, right? You Persian?
No, I can answer that because there's an economist in Davis who was on the forum, and he said that people who do well in their native country tend to do well in their
Well, of course. So it's not cheap to leave Iran to come to the U.S., right? Tickets are expensive. So who tends to leave the home country? The more educated. So then they say, well, my parents came without a penny. But you know what? They came without a penny, but they came with what? Their education, social, cultural capital. And is it a coincidence that most of the Iranian populations immigrate to two cities, major cities, well, more than two, but where I know, in California, Westwood and Irvine, which happen to have some of the best educational systems, right? So pre-migration factors matter. So you have Korean populations, Chinese populations, Japanese populations that on average come from higher SES. That translates to higher mobility for the second generation, right? You can take the Mexican case. The most educated Mexicanos that come here, their kids tend to do better, right? So that's a structural immigration. Does he get the book, by the way?
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. So that's important, understanding how pre-migration factors impact the success of the second generation.
You provide a good balance between talking to the reality that Latinos in education face, as well as providing a sense of hope. So,
yeah,
congratulations to you on that.
Thank you.
Now, at the same time, in reviewing your slides, there seems to be an emphasis in terms of community, students, parents, in driving that sense of hope.
Yes.
And for the most part, all of us here are in leadership.
Yeah.
Where is the accountability for the leaders in creating these structures of success for Latinos, and particularly knowing that leaders are in a place of authority, a place of influence, a place where they can allocate resources if they believe on that vision of increasing Latino success. So your thoughts on that?
Oh, I absolutely agree. We have chapters, it's just I only had to pick 3. We have a great chapter by Luis Rodriguez on intentional excellence, right? And how school leaders ought to understand these issues. And what's happening now is that, and I'm glad to see it, a lot of school leaders are Latinos themselves, or African Americans themselves, and they understand the needs of the communities. But yes, it's crucial, it's important, and thank you for pointing it out.
My comment, question, Scott, is that I think those structures are coming online, which is if you look at the new ESSA, you look in the bill, and let's say you're nerdy like me, and you download the bill and you read the bill. If you just do a search for engagement or climate, you will see the new multiple measure approaches states have open to them as a potential possibility. But the reason why that's important here in California is for those of you who know the schools are aware of the LCFF and the LCAPs, which California was the first state to say that we can build on this community wealth, this cultural wealth, and go to communities and ask them to do the strategic planning.
Right.
And put resources behind it for low SES kids, ELL kids, and foster kids, right? Of course, there's been hiccups in that process because for 15 years, the federal government has been telling us exactly what to do and how to do it while telling us that we have flexibility. So there's been some hiccups in that development process. But I think with the new ESSA, this work, especially the work that we're talking about the case study of the community-based organizations in LA, that's a key piece, which is that we have to communicate to legislators, because when you have conversations with legislators about communities being involved in policy, what they say, essentially, if you can paraphrase it, is we don't trust them, right? We don't trust them, we don't think they have the capacity. And so there are civil rights organizations, for example, in Texas, that are showing how communities are involved with these policy processes. And so I think this is key work in showing that there's this community wealth and there's this interest in these communities to be involved with the assessment, which you talked about, and with the development of this new generation of accountability in the next 5 to 10 years.
And kind of thank you, Doctor, and echoing on that, your perspective, is that often our communities and these communities are a captured market. Legislators don't care, policymakers don't care. Why? Because often these populations don't vote, right? And we need to start changing that, and that's where school leaders come in. How can we advocate for our communities and our youth to become participants in civil society, right? To go vote, to work and foster community, right? Another thing I'm really interested in is a link and a complementary between health and education. A healthy community makes for a more educated community and vice versa, right? How can we and school leaders and let's say K-12, sometimes our kids go to school hungry, or, I mean, our kids are getting obese, right? It's cheaper oftentimes for parents to go to McDonald's, right? It's cheaper and faster. You know, $3.99 gets you the whole big old thing that they sell, right? How can we educate and work with parents, school leaders, right? Teachers work with parents to say, you know what? No more orange soda drinks from McDonald's, right? Water, right? Ice water with lemon. Right? So those are ways that I think that school leaders can work actively to work with communities and then inform legislation and policy. Yes?
I'm just curious because from a curriculum standpoint with leaders, because it seems as if one of your case studies you talked about the black male achievement,
Yes.
Program. It seems that is more working to counteract the baking concept, the reproduction concept that's going on within the curriculum of the classroom, because it seems as if it's more relatable to what they're going through in that program. So how would you suggest going about attacking the curriculum standpoint in order to break that baking and that reproduction?
I have this. I was debating between this lecture and my other work on black male, right? And we need a paradigm shift. We need a paradigm shift in the way we view African American boys and Latino boys, in the way we educate them, and the way we structure curriculum to show their assets. Because we're doing a huge disservice to our kids in schools, particularly black and brown boys. And I think it's equally important. I'm not an expert on this. I'm a sociologist. I'm really interested in theoretical perspectives and such. But key to that is how do we construct educational processes, a curriculum that begins to disrupt the paradigms of Black and Latino kids as lazy, as unmotivated, as completely disengaged. Because why they're disengaged is that we're not doing the proper thing within the classroom. Right? And you guys are in ed leadership, and my hope is you guys devise these kind of curriculum and processes. Yes?
I'm very interested in the impact of teachers of color on students. So I'm wondering, in your own experience, you know, you're a success story. So when you were young in K-12, did you have experiences of an educator who looked like you in front of the classroom? What, as far as from a teacher perspective, who helped you become who you are?
No, again, I want to say something unpopular. It's important to have teachers that look like you, but it's not necessary. None of my teachers were Latino. They were all white. And in my first book, The Color of Success, the main teachers were white in Oakland. And yes, I'm an advocate. We need to produce more teachers of color. Yes, we do. But kids know what adults are authentic. Kids know what teachers and adults respect them. Because I've seen as many Black and Latino teachers that disrespect their own. Yes.
I used to teach composition at Cal Poly, which is primarily white, and then I also taught in Paso Robles, which where I had a lot of Latino students. And two texts that I taught, for the white kids, I would give them Bakari Kidwana, why white kids love hip hop, and the white students would write Bakari a letter arguing for it. The other one that I taught was by a man named Victor Davis Hanson, called Mexifornia. And the reason why I taught that book is because I couldn't understand how a classics professor from Fresno State, he was the head of the Hoover Institute, wrote such what seemed like an inflammatory argument. And I was wondering if you have ever considered writing a rebuttal to him, or what you thought about that book.
I need to read it first. Right? I need to read it first. But thank you for, maybe you can email me that citation?
Yeah.
Please. Any final questions? Yes.
I would just like to speak to the point of education, obesity, and wellness. I've gone through the master's program here in curriculum, instruction with emphasis in the arts. I have to learn to say that whole this is more of an FYI. On campus tomorrow is Ben Vereen. Do you know that Ben Vereen's on campus tomorrow? And he has a program starting here in Sacramento called Wellness Through the Arts. And there was even an essay contest where some of the local high school students were encouraged to write essays on some form of the arts that helped them do well. And he has 4 points he'd like to cover called BOLD, which is students facing bullying, obesity, low self-esteem, and diabetes. So it kind of ties into your topic about the wellness and the obesity. So this is just kind of a community forum. I didn't know this organization was in Sacramento, and where it's being hosted by the theater and dance department. I'm on the faculty there, so and I'll be helping out with the program tomorrow. But I just wanted to bring that to the attention of us here in Sacramento, that there is a chapter, especially with the cultural implications we talked about with the cultural arts, happens to be in particular.
And I agree. Thank you.
So I want to thank Dr. Conchas